Do you remember watching a movie about a British man taking on bad guys with a sinister attempt on world domination? The spy was actually driving something far more older than modern day supercars. It wasn't a McLaren, it wasn't a Nissan GTR. It was this, an old school GT sports car going by the known name Aston Martin. And it was this Aston Martin that made the spy famous. The spy never had any capabilities with modern day sports cars, but when it comes to mundane pasts of modern sports cars, this would be it. And that is the Aston Martin DB5. Today we are diving into the elegant history of the Aston Martin DB5. So let's talk Aston Martin DB5. The Aston Martin DB5 was released between 1963 and 1966, going by the famous name the 007 vehicle, or should I say the James Bond car. But there was only one detail that many people miss. Why was it referred as the 007 brand? Well, here's the thing. 007 was practically famous for contributing to Aston Martin's brand with the spy cars, and this gave the whole revolution era of spies wanting to drive an Aston Martin. The Aston Martin DB5 felt perfect for James Bond. It was actually featured in two different James Bond movies. One was Goldfinger and the other one was Cannonball. The DB7 was basically a far more different class of the DB series. The DB5 was practically famous for James Bond's trademark vehicle. Another cool factor about the 007 car is that the 007 car was also used for a Disney Cars 2 character going by the nickname Finn McMissile, who was also likely a car based on this car, 007's car, the James Bond Aston Martin DB5. What I truly like about the Aston Martin DB5 is that the Aston Martin DB5 came with an inline 6 power plant reaching about 282 horsepower. Now that's something unusual because most cars from the 1960s would only have about 145 or sometimes 130 horsepower short compared to what modern day sports cars have in the era. But ever since the James Bond series, many people still believe that the Aston Martin DB5 was the main hero car made for James Bond. Ever since Goldfinger, many people still really think that the Aston Martin DB5 was more than just a vehicle. It's an all-wheel personality that perfectly blends James Bond's character with the brand. The instant nationality of Aston Martin and James Bond make a perfect blend of spice and elegance. Ever since the performance of the Aston Martin DB5, sure, it was old, it was analog, it didn't feel like a modern sports car, but it was actually a GT chassis car that was made for Grand Touring races, such as Le Mans and Grand Prix racing. But when it comes to Aston Martin and 007, you just realize the whole mix was a lot more different. It's a British car driven by an actual British agent going by his all-known nickname 007, and that 007 name was coded as James Bond. The Aston Martin DB5 is James Bond's ultimate vehicle. Why? Because it was frequently shown in multiple films of the 007 franchise, but then you realize that James Bond drives other different vehicles like BMWs, Toyotas, Mercedes, Land Rovers. There is a whole list of all of these things, and the Aston Martin DB5 was the real reason why James Bond had to own it. You're not just seeing a car, you're seeing an actual legend. A four-wheel motor car that was basically living a mundane past about racing, but ever since the 007 series, the car transformed into something different. It's a mobile arsenal of weapons and gadgets combined with the essence of British engineering and mundane racing technology. What you truly understand about the Aston Martin DB5 is that although the Aston Martin was meant to be a race car, the Aston Martin DB5 in the 007 series just became far more different. It blends the natural captivity of spies and British performance, and I meant that literally. But there was also another spy series that basically did had Aston Martins, and that was Johnny English, the famous man portrayed as Mr. Bean by Rowan Atkinson, who was actually a pure car enthusiast as well. In fact, what Rowan Atkinson and James Bond had together is that both of them were known for their slapstick comedy, action packed drama, and pretty much the thrill of explosives and spy series. The espionage between Aston Martin and 007 quickly transitions to that of comedy with Rowan Atkinson now going behind the wheel as Johnny English. Between Johnny English, James Bond, and Aston Martin, both of these three legends came together to make one sole purpose: make Aston Martin a pure class of British engineering, performance, and spy espionage. After the success of Golden Eye and Goldfinger, the James Bond series never actually portrayed any other vehicle. But despite all of those other vehicles being famously used in other James Bond series, the Aston Martin DB5 was the hallmark and the centerpiece character that once portrayed James Bond in the original 1963 film Goldfinger. And that high-balling tale of 007 driving a GT sports car turned into a spy mobile just makes everything purely sensible. Like other supercars that had supernatural gadgets such as the Batmobile and, of course, any other supercar that did had gadgets like these, the Aston Martin DB5 of James Bond inspired other different vehicles such as Knight Rider from the same series of the same name and Batman's Batmobile. All three of these vehicles became known with the character, not just a car, not just a prop, a real movie legend, born to take on the action that no other mundane sports car would take on in racing history. The whole mundane story of the Aston Martin quickly changed its life around thanks to James Bond, and the Aston Martin would have never succeeded if James Bond hadn't to be the one who be there. And that is the story of the Aston Martin DB5.